Hey, good morning, one and all. Uh, we'll get started with today's class. To give you a quick recap, in the last class we saw some of the characteristics of an embedded system. So they are application and domain specific. They are reactive and real time, and they operate in harsh environments like extreme temperatures or pressure or another environmental factors, and they are distributed, meaning like there will be multiple embedded systems that will be working in coordination, and they need to be small in size and light in weight, and there are definitely they need to be low power design. So power is a constraint here. And after this, we saw some of the quality attributes. So specifically, there were two types. One is operational quality attributes, and the other one is non-operational quality attributes. So we were seeing operational quality attributes. So these are non-functional requirements. The quality attributes are, and in that operational quality attributes has to do with direct operation of the embedded system. So we saw a few of those. Uh, we saw what was the response. Response time is a measure of how quick the system responds after the user uh, uh, gives the input. So they need to be hard. I mean, they need to be real time in behavior. They can be classified as hard real time or soft real time. And the other one we saw was throughput. So throughput was nothing but the number of work that is getting done in a unit of time. Okay, so it's like the quantity. So the different quantity you can give. It's like number of work or number of jobs, things like that. And then we were seeing reliability. So reliability, as we saw, is nothing but it's the probability of how much the system can be relied upon. Okay, in other words, what is the probability of failure? If you take the probability of failure, then if you do 1 minus that, you will get the reliability. It's just the other part of the set. Okay, so here we saw two factors, or like two metrics. So one is mean time between failures and mean time to repair. So mean time between failures is nothing but the time between two failures. So first time you have a failure and then you went and serviced it, and it's been operational for some time and again it failed. So the time interval between these two is the mean time between failure, and it's called mean time because you do it over a period of time and then take the average. Okay, and the second one is mean time to repair, and this is the time to service, how long it takes for for it to service the failure. Now these two are very important metrics. Okay, so we saw this in the last class. So now today we will see about maintainability. So now maintainability is an extension of your reliability and the failure, right? So maintainability deals with support and maintenance, the end user or the client in case of technical issue or product failures. Okay, so basically they are like two complementary factors. Reliability and maintainability go hand in hand. A more reliable system means it less maintainability requirements, right? So it's very obvious. So there are two types of maintenance. So one is a periodic maintenance or scheduled maintenance, or the other one, and the other one is unexpected failures. Okay, so the first one is it's a more like a preventive maintenance, and the other one is corrective or reactive. Okay, so we saw an example of the printer last time, right? So when you get a printer, and the printer comes with a specific instruction, and it actually has some kind of a standard where it specifies the printer can print n number of printouts with one cartridge. Okay, so if that is the case, then you can expect the ink cartridge to be replaced after so many days. okay, depending on how frequent you print. Okay, so it's more like a, so you will get to know, and also you will get the notification your ink is getting low on your printer, so you can arrange for your periodic maintenance. While on the other hand, there are things like unexpected failures. So for example, suddenly the printer fails, one of the motor fails. Okay, if things like that happen, that's not expected, right? So that is more like a reactive. So unless you hit the failure, you will not know. There's no way of predicting when it will fail. So now there is a very important metric, it's called availability. So based on your the reliability metrics that we saw, you can calculate the availability. So availability is the ratio of the time that the embedded system is up and running divided by the total time. Okay, so how much time your embedded system is available to you. So it is calculated like the formula given here. Excuse me. So it's given by mean time between failure. So this is the time that it is available for you, right? Let's say if you take printer, this is the time the printer is available for you to print, divided by mean time between failure plus the mean time to repair. So basically the total time is nothing but how much time the printer is available to you plus the total repair time or the service time. So if you add this becomes the total time. You get that ratio of this and the total time, you get the availability. So next topic is security. Okay, so security has three major again metrics or factors, we should say. So first one is confidentiality, next one is integrity, and third one is availability. So confidentiality is nothing but the data is confidential for use, meaning it's confidential, meaning like when you say something is confidential, it means it's secret for somebody, and for somebody it should not be revealed, correct? So confidentiality should make sure that the data associated with the embedded system is not accessible by unauthorized users. So unauthorized access should be prevented. So that is confidentiality. Integrity is nothing but the data is correct. Okay, it's not modified by some unauthorized person. So whatever data you have, the data can be relied upon. It has not been tampered with. So the data integrity is what it means here. And third factor is availability. And availability is kind of the other side of the coin of confidentiality. So when confidentiality says some people should not get access to data, availability says there are specific people that need access to it. Okay, while the unauthorized persons cannot access the data, authorized people should have access, right? Like if I have access to an embedded system and then it says confidentiality, nobody can view the data, but I need to view the data, it is my embedded system, my data, right? So that availability should be there. You cannot protect the data from the rest of the world, then that defeats the purpose. So these three things, right? Like first thing is confidentiality, like preventing unauthorized access. The other one is the availability, people having access should get access. And third thing is integrity, nobody should be able to, or like unauthorized people should not be able to modify the data. So these three are three key factors for security. Any questions on this? So an example for this is safety deposit locker, or even in your ATM that you can take for example. ATM will read your card, but on top of that, it will also ask you PIN, right? So it actually, all these factors come into play there. There are actually more to security, so but we are just touching upon the surface of it. Next, we move on to safety. So this is a very important topic, an interesting topic too. Okay, so while the both the academia and industry have been talking about security and on data integrity, there are a lot of research that are going on in that area. Safety has only been uh, viewed in the computing domain recently, like for the past probably 10 years or so, a decade or so. Previously, there used to be safety, but then it was not given that much importance as we used to give it to security. But safety became a very critical issue because embedded systems are deployed almost everywhere, right? You take any field, and that field will need some kind of an automation help. So they need to put some chip on top of it, and they need to control the entire automation system. And they have to make sure, because of a failure or malfunction of your embedded system, the entire automation should not fail and create a catastrophe. Okay, again we'll start with a simple example of say a car. If you take car for example, when you press the brakes, right, the brakes should be applied. Okay, it's not only, I mean, it has to be applied in real time too. And the other thing is, if the brake fails, it has to fail safe. Meaning, like if the embedded system fails, then the brake should be automatically engaged. It should. So so it's like how we saw the active low, active high in your switches, right? It's something similar to that. So if you have noticed, all the power steering cars these days, right? Once you run out of petrol, you will not be able to actually turn the steering wheel. That is actually kind of a safety measure, because it's a power steering, and you should not be actually driving or turning your car when you're out of gas. Okay, so it's one of the safety features. So the car gets locked in that position. Okay, so that's a safety feature that is available. Similarly, you have a safety features in flight control systems, nuclear power reactor, other industrial automation. So there will be like rotor blades, for example, right? So the rotor blades will be cutting like wood or even metals and things like that. And if and there will be sensors. The sensors should be smart enough to detect any human nearby it, like a human arm closer to the blade or something. If the human hand comes very close to the rotor blade, it has to detect that, and then it has to stop the blade, so that to avoid any injury. Okay, so let's say this is the embedded system, and what if that sensor fails? How will you design that embedded system? The rotor is spinning, and then a human hand comes close to the blade, and the embedded system actually fails, like the sensor fails or something, or the embedded system tripped, or it is reset for some reason. Now what will happen, right? It should not lead to catastrophe. How you have to design an embedded system is that, if the safety mechanism fails, if let us say the embedded system fails, it should automatically trigger some kind of like a watchdog or something, right? So you tie that to the power of the entire automation system, and it should stop the entire functionality. There could be like some false positives, meaning there could be instances where you actually do not bring your hand, but at that time some false signals are raised, and the embedded system shuts down the entire automation. It is still okay. It's okay. I mean, you thought it is a human hand, but it is not a human hand. But you, for safety, you have shut down the system, right? So you have to fail safe. So that is the fail on the safer side. Okay, so that is the idea behind safety. Any questions on this, guys? Guys can hear me, right? I didn't check with you and unmute. Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, okay. All right. So that's about safety. Safety is kind of underplayed, at least in the from the academic perspective, but right now lots of companies are focusing on this. If you I mean, there are a lot of scope for the software domain too. So you may be thinking, this has more to do with the embedded systems, but no. So there are lots of software level software stacks that need to be prepared for safety, because all the embedded systems these days run operating systems, right? So the operating system should not fail. It should not become like our regular desktops, where suddenly it will say, no, it's spinning, okay, not responding, your operating system is not responding. You should not get those kind of things, right? So the failure of software should not lead to catastrophe. So safety is a very, very important factor. So next we come to non-operational attributes. Okay, so these don't deal with the actual operation of your embedded system, but these help in developing your embedded systems. So the list is here. So we'll see them one by one. The first one is testability and debuggability. So this seems like so if you think about software, right? So we when we develop softwares, most part of it is it's only like not most part of it, or, I mean, I would say 99% of the code is towards the development only, right? So whatever software you want to develop, if you want to say you want to develop like an Android application or like a desktop app or something, you will, like 99% of what you're coding will be part of your direct development. Although these days you have the exception handlers and things like that, right? But in embedded systems, how will you make sure you have some features for testability? It's not like, so you have come up with this embedded system and suddenly I mean, you cannot go back and then turn on or turn off one part of hardware, correct? So testability should be part and parcel of the design phase of the embedded system itself. What I'm trying to say is, when you're designing a processor, I would say probably 30 to 40% of the logic behind the processor will be towards the debug side. Meaning, like there will be like additional modules that will help you to probe the particular hardware component and see whether it is working fine or not. For example, there will be some counters and some status registers that are part of your uh, embedded system. So now, when you actually have uh, the system launched, I mean, when you run the processor, you will be able to track what exactly the processor does. Okay, so so uh, you'll be actually surprised to see there are tools that you can connect to, your embedded systems can be connected to, which will track every single register and every single uh, uh, memory address, right? So you can check all the statuses in real time. Okay, so you can see what is the status of PC when you execute this particular instruction. So it's something similar to your Keil environment, right? Keil is a simulator, but you can actually tie that to your actual embedded device and track that in real time. And this helps in the debuggability. For example, if there is something wrong with some like cache coherency or some logic, then you can actually test it out. You can write some programs to test it out and see where exactly the failure is, and and try to see if you can patch it up using some like software code or something, okay, or like a firmware code. So that's about your testability and debuggability. Next one is evolvability. So evolvability, okay. So I mean, the term is very it's a funny thing to learn this in embedded system, but it's nothing but the versions that you have. Okay, so you should be able, your embedded system should be able to grow along with the technology, should not be outdated. So once you have an embedded system launched, then you should not be replacing it every season, right? Like for example, you take a car. So a car that you buy should work for you for at least 5 to 10 years, right? So it has to work for that long, and your embedded system should not be outdated. It's one of, actually, in the beginning, right? The navigation systems that used to come in the cars were very unpopular because of the very same reason. The expensive cars, the expensive cars meaning like the good branded luxury cars, right? Even though they are branded, their navigation systems were never popular, and that's because you had your GPS at that time. You never had this much advanced Google Maps. You only had GPS. So the GPS devices were actually much more forward compared to your car, and GPS you can actually replace frequently, but you can't just replace your car because of your navigation system, right? So the navigation system was pretty bad, and it will just get outdated in 1 or 2 years. Okay, so I cannot replace my car, or I cannot replace that navigation system alone also. So that becomes a problem. Okay, when you think of this evolvability, then when you actually have some kind of a navigation system in your car, then you have to think ahead, like in like 5 to 10 years down the line. You need to think and then put that technology there. I'm not saying, I mean, like, it's very hard to do that, right? But you need to give the provision. Like for example, you should have provision for like advanced protocols. You will expect that, oh, okay, CAN is a protocol that is getting popular, so let me give a provision for that. Right now my car doesn't need a CAN kind of communication, but let me just give a provision. It's something like having, if you buy a desktop, right? You can actually extend it up to 8 GB of RAM, but when you buy it, you buy only 4 GB of RAM. Correct. So that's how you make it evolvable. And the other thing is, you should be able to replace the parts. Okay, so you replace, so for example, you take the core ARM chip. Let's say you have Cortex M3, you can take away the Cortex M3 and then you put Cortex M5, and then still your system should work with, of course, like with a little bit of software updates. You should be able to run it. So that's the evolvability part of it. Okay, and most importantly, you have new firmware, right? So you can actually work on updating these firmware. There are a lot of patches that are coming, and there are also some jokes that go on, like with automobiles, right? Like I said, so the cars have navigation system, cars have lots of embedded systems, and they have real-time operating system on top of it. So now, what if one day the car says, no, your operating system is running an update, you cannot start the car, and you have to go to your work, right? So it'll say, installing updates, wait till the system restarts. So something like that. So actually, I mean, there are things like that too. The next is portability. So that's again an extension of the evolvability. So portability is nothing but you should be able to take specific parts of your embedded system and then port it to somewhere else. I'm not saying like you can take the embedded system in microwave and put it in a washing machine. I mean, we saw that example earlier, right? So it's not like that. But what I'm trying to say is, there should be some level of independence. At least there are the components that you use, right? You should be able to take it and then make it into another embedded system. If you take, you can still have the same ARM processor and use it for washing machine as well as microwave. You can still do that. However, if you develop some kind of an ASIC, right, application specific integrated circuit for a microwave oven, then you cannot take that ASIC and put it in a washing machine. It will not work. It will never work. Okay, because that application specific IC is only for that application. Okay, so when you decide but ASICs are customized, but they have their own advantages. But when you design an embedded system, right, you need to make a call. Do I have to go for a microprocessor, or should I go for an ASIC? Okay, so ASICs are also cheap, by the way. So anyway, so you need to make the call, and there has to be portability. Okay, and next is the time to prototype and market. Okay, so time to market and time elapsed, right? So this is a very critical thing, especially when you are doing a managerial role, right, in the embedded system, a company that makes embedded systems. Then you have to take a call. Okay, so you will be planning out when the product will get launched and when you should start the planning. Okay, so there are different phases similar to, I mean, what you have learned in software engineering. There are some design cycles for embedded systems too. Okay, so you need to plan ahead. So you will be expecting, okay, in say December 2020 I am going to launch this product. So now what should I do in 20 I mean in November 2020 I should have been finished with all my testing and validation. So by September at least I need to have done like an alpha prototyping. Okay, and then you go back and say, oh, so which means that in the next week I should fix my design. Okay, so you need to think of that when you are going to productize, and you have to plan ahead. Okay, so that's something. So the other thing is you need to have as minimal amount of time. So when you say you're going to release the product in the market, you should at least have a prototype far ahead of the schedule. Okay, so first make a prototype and see if it is working, and then you try to market. So many companies, what they do is they actually build on top of their older products. Okay, reusability, right? We have always emphasized, computer science has actually always emphasized on reusing the code, or be it anything, right? So here also you reuse the old product and slightly modify the old product into a new one. That's why you don't see that many new architectures coming. So you always try to use the existing architecture, modify it to the need, and then you do it, so that your prototype time to prototype is reduced. Okay, per unit cost and revenue. Okay, so this is this deals with again like the marketing side of it, right? How much profit you can make out of your embedded system. So that is a very important factor. Anybody can come up with any crazy idea. Okay, so actually it is in today's world it is possible to design a hovercraft, or what to say, a jetpack, right? So there are prototypes already available of jetpacks and hovercrafts, but why are they not commercialized? Because they have to be cost effective, right? And also if you think of electric vehicles, Tesla cars are out. You know what, Tesla cars, how long they took to actually come to this phase? It took a long time, and that's because of so many reasons, and one of the main reason is the cost. Okay, so you need to make profit out of it. So let's look at this, right? So when you design any embedded system, so there are multiple factors that you need to look into. Initially, when you start designing the prototype, the during uh, the product introduction, so beginning of the when you actually finish the prototype and then start releasing the product, the cost is going to be really high, the unit cost, right? So you can relate this to your cell phones. So if you take cell phones, the day of the release of a new cell phone, right? Any particular brand or any particular model, it's going to cost high. Okay, and because there's going to be a lot of demand, that's one thing. The other thing is I don't know how much I should manufacture. Only based on the demand I will manufacture. So I cannot do a mass scale production in the beginning itself. So because of that, the unit price is also going to go high. Correct? You understand? So the cost is decided based on this, right? So how much effort my company has put in. Let us say 100 guys have worked on this project. Okay, and these 100 guys I have to pay salary, and they are using the company resource, they are using the labs, ACs, all these things and all the other facilities, everything. So you add up all these costs. And what about the hardware testing equipments, right? How much, and then the fabrication cost, and put all the costs together. And then when you release the product, I cannot suddenly, I cannot say that, okay, I'm going to release 1 million product in first day. I cannot do that. I'll release like say 10,000 or something like that, right? And because of that, that when you divide that number by the productions, the number of the the cost or the selling price of the unit is going to be high. Now this will change. Okay, so initially you will not be seeing any profit at all, so you'll only be selling. But there is a growth phase where your product will pick up. Okay, so at that time your unit cost price will slightly come down, and then your product sales are just going to pick up, it's just going to go high. Okay, and at the same time you will see profit. This is the phase where you see maximum profit, the end of, or the matured phase of your the growth phase, right? And later after this, right, your product is still going to make more sales, but you may not see the same amount of profit. It's going to steadily decline. Okay, and finally you hit one point, and because of this, like you will have to be, see, at this point, right, you already have captured some kind of a market and you still want to hold the market, so you will actually little bit lose on the profit side, and you'll bring down the unit cost. At this point, your number of units that are sold, the denominator is very high, right? So because of that, the unit price will also come down. And slowly after some time, right, your product will just vanish away, and by this time, if you're smart enough, your next product will be launched here. Okay, when you try to retire the first product, the second product will come out. Okay, so this is the product life cycle curve. Okay, any questions, guys? Okay, looks like we are done. So you just have some objective questions here. It's these are the back questions in the book. Okay, you can take a look at this. And if there are no other questions, then yeah, we are done. Thank you.